Hello, and welcome to the Mental Perk podcast, where we focus on real people, real issues, and real talk. I'm Carla Hutcherson, a licensed professional counselor.
And I'm Brandy Mock, entrepreneur, author, and community leader.
We are here to talk about all things mental health, whether it's daily stress, academic and work pressures, managing a diagnosis, or suicidal and self-harm behaviors. We want this to be a space of non-judgment, honest talk, and destigmatizing mental health issues. Most of all, we want to provide you the support, encouragement you need to win your everyday battles.
Welcome back to Mental Perk. Today's guest is Greg Wilkerson. Greg is a native Texas North Texan. He was born in Arlington, Texas, and graduated high school in Venus, Texas. As a young man, he served as a volunteer firefighter for the cities of Venus-Mansfield. Prior to entering the law enforcement career, he served as a prison guard in the Correction Corporation of America at Venus Unit in Johnson County. He's an experienced law enforcement veteran and administrator that proudly served agencies in North Texas area for many years. He retired in Denton County Water District Police Department as Director of Public Safety in December of 2021 after serving 30 years in Richardson, Little Elm, and Corinth, and in Denton County Water District Police Department. Welcome so much, Greg, for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
So tell us a little bit about Greg, how it all started, your life growing up, and what got you to where you are today.
I recently shared a story with one of my colleagues. I grew up in Arlington, Texas, born there. Growing up as a young child, my first memories about law enforcement was my neighbor that lived across the street. His name was John Hethcox, and he was a state trooper. And early days, 5, 6 years old, remember waiting out on the front steps with my mom. We're waiting on Dad to get home. John would drive home in his squad car, and I dubbed a nickname for him, John Dee-Doo, because he'd turn on the siren, and the siren would wail for
John
me every
Dee-Doo.
day. I couldn't pronounce Hethcox back in the day. But he always made time for me, and that memory stuck with me. And fast forward a few years before I retired with the Elm Ridge Police Department, I got to know a county judge that was a former state trooper, and I happened to ask him one day, I said, "Where did you work?" And he said, "Hurst Euless, Bedford area." And I said, "You don't know a guy by the name of John Hethcox, do you?" And he said, "Yes." Come to find out, he was still alive and had served a full career with the Department of Public Safety. They worked together for a number of years, and he traded numbers with me, and actually it came full circle. So I got to meet him. After all these years, he still lives at the same house in Arlington.
Wow.
With him and his wife, had been married all this year. So took them to lunch, and they actually bought my lunch. But, you know, the takeaway to that is I used that when I got home, and I probably created the longest Facebook post I've ever had with the intent of pushing it out to law enforcement officers and letting them know the impact that just a mere image can have on an individual.
Wow.
And, you know, looking up to this guy, and I'm sure there's days that he came home and the last thing he wanted to see was little Greg Wilkerson running over to his car
But that
after
impact.
a long day. Absolutely. And he never turned me away, you know, and I when I looked him in the eye and I told him, "John," I said, I'm so thankful. I said, "You spawned a police chief and you didn't even know it."
Wow.
And to be able to share
that.
and to be able to share that and come full circle with that, because he was my earliest memory of
That had to have
a
warmed
first
his
responder.
heart.
Oh,
I
it
mean,
did. It
you
did.
don't even realize the impact you have on people's lives, and I think that's so important you shared that, because a lot of people
gives me chills just talking
don't
about it, yeah.
realize one word, one something can change someone's life forever, and it sounds like that's what he did with you.
It is, and we don't always get to see that or hear about it or learn about it. And just the outpouring of support from his family when I tagged him on Facebook, he's on social media, just reading the things that they had to say. Absolutely, that's my dad. That's the man he is, and it's just I'm just
that's
so glad. I mean, it's just
wonderful. Did that inspire you though, in your career when kids came up to you, or when you had the opportunity to also engage with kids? Did it also affect how you were affected by him?
Absolutely. So my first police department was at Richardson, Texas. I was hired there in 1991.
Yeah.
I was 21 years old, young cop, ready to save the world, but quickly went into the bicycle unit in the mid-'90s. And matter of fact, one of my best friends is a police chief in Saxe. I saw him last night, and we were telling old war stories about bicycles. But we patrolled an area of Spring Valley and Coit, which was at that time one of the most culturally diverse areas.
Yeah.
We had residents from Pakistan, Kurdistan, Iran, Iraq, Mexico, African Americans. It was just a melting pot. And the elementary school at Richardson ISD over there, it was said there was over 27 different languages and dialects spoken at that elementary school. So
a true melting pot for sure.
it is.
Yeah.
And to meet one-on-one with those people, you're much more approachable on a bicycle.
Right.
So that for me really got me going to the direction I'm leading to, community policing and being there for that community, finding out what we perceive as a problem is not the problem as officers. And the only way to know what the problem is or what the perception of that problem is to contact, have a relationship, build relations with that public, with that community.
Wow. That's interesting you say that, because you talk about this man that influenced you younger, but what was it like growing up at home? I mean, were you someone that was influenced? Was there another influence in your life?
Absolutely. My dad was active military veteran, served in Vietnam, so grew up in a very strict, regimented household that taught me a lot of responsibilities. I'm a Gen Xer. He's a baby boomer. We're very closely aligned in that sentiment there. So he was up every morning, make the bed, everything was squared away before you went to school, and taught me a lot. But transitioning to the reason we're here today to talk about mental health issues, I now know what I witnessed growing up as a young child is the flashbacks, the PTSD, the things that my father experienced before it was even ever talked about or even a diagnosis, quote unquote. So that, I think helped pave the way for me understanding the challenges of someone with PTSD and then having to deal with those type of people on the street. And,
right.
And fast forwarding into Richardson, I remember after the Iraqi War and veterans coming back and PTSD starts, really being talked about and openly discussed, it was very important for us to not only know it, understand it, but also be trained on how to deal with it, how to de-escalate. The key word today now is everything you see on the media, de-escalation, and that's crucial when you're dealing with those type of people. I remember the flashbacks. He would hear, the old Chinook helicopter, the dual rotor helicopters coming across. We were living in Mansfield at the time and close to Carswell Air Force Base, but things like that, he would freeze or
Wow.
I see him out there mowing the lawn and just hit the deck.
Now, did you realize back then that that's what he was responding to, or is it just? I mean, you were kind of like
absolutely not,
and he never talked about it, I'm sure.
Not until I got my graduate degree at 40. So went back to school. Needed that to help get me to the place where I wanted to be, which was ultimately a police chief. And I wrote several papers through 4 years of college, and one of it was the effects of Agent Orange, which he was impacted by. He served in the Central Highlands area of Vietnam near Pleiku, and he was out there in the jungles day in and day out, covered with that defoliant. And, has had multiple issues and problems throughout the years. But at that time, no, I had no clue as a young child growing up. I just Dad's got anger issues.
Okay.
Or what no way to really, I guess, put a label or a diagnosis on it, and that's all I knew.
Right.
And as he aged, and I really saw a turning point when I asked him one day, and at that point he was in his late 60s. I said, Dad, I'd like to interview you. I'm writing a paper, and I really need to talk to you. And at this point, he had gone from coping with drinking alcohol to completely stopping and changing his life. He's got great willpower, and that was a turning point. He actually had a very lengthy conversation with me. It was over the phone. It wasn't in person, but we talked about it, and I could still tell there's not necessarily triggers, but he would get very, very passionate about some of the things when he'd have that recall about certain items and certain actions and events that happened throughout his time there. But that was the first time that he really opened up to me, and it seemed after that, my youngest daughter she saw some medals in a display case at her grandmother's house, my mom's house, and I'll never forget. It was Christmas Eve night, and watching them spend almost 2 hours talking about the Vietnam War.
Wow.
And I'm like, I wish he would have done that with me. It just because I see the healing that came along with him talking about it.
Oh yeah.
Getting it out. And instead of just keeping it inside that he did all those years when me and my two brothers were growing up, it's just, hey, he handled it in his own way, the way he knew best. But wasn't the best way.
And that's what we're talking about here at Mental Perk. We're trying to get people talking about mental health and opening up and realizing that dialogue is healing, right? And so that's really what we're focused on. We know there's a high percentage of officers who struggle with PTSD.
There are. Nowadays we find that more and more applicants are coming from the military into the police realm and career, and even that aside. So we're onboarding employees that already have it.
Right.
Which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's to know they have it and how they control it and what they do. I mean, but it's still it's a very tough issue for a lot of employers on the administrative side of things. Is what kind of liability are we getting into by employing someone that has that? What if they have an episode? So there's a lot of that, and I think a lot of it still to this day is probably not talked about. They may have their big diagnosis out there.
Yeah.
And trauma is a funny thing because you can have a traumatic experience, but you may not see the effects of the trauma on your brain and in the PTSD and the diagnosis until years later. So people don't talk about it because maybe they're not affected immediately, but then later on the symptoms show up.
Exactly. And just not even trauma, just the natural day-to-day ups and downs of law enforcement is such a stressor. I know that when I was probably 15 to 17 years into my 30-year career when I was made aware of a book called Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement. Dr. Gil Martin had wrote about it, and it talks about just the challenges that go on with all the daily pressures of being a law enforcement officer and the impact that it has on your family. And, there's not a police officer I know that's been married one time and still stayed married. I've personally been married twice out of 30 years. I've lost 5 officers, 3 to suicide, 2 to in the line of duty deaths in 30 years, serving Richardson, Little M, and Corinth. That's scary. It's the North Dallas suburbs.
And I just read something that more police officers die by suicide than the line of duty. That's a scary
true.
statistic.
Yes.
And
3 of those were Richardson police officers.
Yeah. Oh wow! And you talked about like these officers that are you're hiring on that have PTSD, and I see the pros and cons to that from the administrative side, but also too, do you see that bringing these guys on board may be also effective for whenever y'all are on call and maybe they identify someone that's suffering from PTSD, those officers can maybe relate to them a little bit better? Do you kind of see that as
absolutely.
a pro?
That is definitely the pro side of things, is having someone that's been there, done that, male, female, whatever. We've got a lot of female veterans out there that are serving now too. I think most of my recent experience, it's typically with I think just because of the sheer numbers of males that serve in the military, that by and large there's that out there, but I don't want to dismiss the fact that there are a lot of females out there too, that have the very same thing. It's just it's race and gender and
it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care.
It doesn't discriminate.
We say that all the time. It does not care.
But going back to what we talked about with if I would have known as a young officer that there were books out there about emotional survival, could it have helped me save a marriage? Could it help save me financially? You talk about the ups and downs. When an officer goes on patrol, they're in a heightened state of awareness. And I'm talking 90s. I'm not talking about the craziness that's going on in today's society.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine. I've been off the streets long enough to know that I don't know anymore. But I can relate to when I was, that you're in that heightened state, and then when you go from that heightened state to the most highest elevated state, when you're dealing with facing someone with another weapon against you, or you're in a physical combat, a fight over something, or you're breaking up a fight. I mean, that high that you get from the adrenaline and everything else that's kicking in, the Pitocin, all the things that your body's dealing with. I mean, foot chases, things like that, where literally we would, after it was all done, I mean, your legs wouldn't stop shaking. You had all this energy that you just didn't know what to do with, and you come home.
Wow.
And you're on your day off, and now you've gone from 30,000 feet, at Mach 3 to the lowest of lows,
it's going to
sitting
take a
there
toll.
with your 2-year-old watching Barney, and it's that mental up and down, and typically what you see, and you read Dr. Gil Martin's book, and it talks about you're going to want to replace that high, whether that's with alcohol, whether that's promiscuous activity with another person, or shopping, spending money, fast cars, motorcycles. I've done it all. I'd be a millionaire right now if I wouldn't have bought. I've had every Harley known to man. I've had boats. But you look for that outlet of what next, what's next, because it is so addictive that it's like a drug. And so mentally, that alone, without the trauma of a major incident, just that alone, the day in and day out, I believe is enough for some people to really, really suffer.
Wow. And I read through that PTSD in officers is built over time. It's not a single event. It's like a series of things.
Exactly. It could be a huge traumatic, all these officers that you see, the most recent thing that impacted us here locally in Allen with the active shooter over there, that one and only single event.
A game changer.
Game changer. However, that doesn't happen everywhere all the time, thankfully. But these other smaller episodes, they build, they compound. And, I've seen, even when I was working for Richardson, the steps that were taken internally to help combat that. And the first thing from a police officer's perspective is, one thing I always prided myself on is I didn't associate just with police officers. That's the one thing I did not do. I had friends and neighbors and others that did something totally different. When I was away, I wanted to be away. That was my downtime, and it was just a choice I made. I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but it was a really good choice for me.
Yeah,
right.
And so I had an outlet, and I had other people that I was around, but it just seems like sometimes that when you're just focused around just that, that's the only people you trust.
Right.
And they don't want to go to a counselor that's never been a police officer or at least served in the military. They're not going to, I promise you, the majority will not open up, and they barely open up to. I was part of a critical incident stress management team at a couple of my departments, and we had these teams that would be there after a traumatic event that would, do you want to talk? You can't force someone to do that. No. It's not going to work. But you've got to open that door and allow it to just sit there, and it may be a day, it may be a week, it may be a month later, it may be a year later. Hey, I need to talk to you about this. It's so there's things that really stick with you, and probably the most difficult thing I've ever done in my entire life is have to work one of those suicides that I told you about. It was one of my officers, and my team had to go in and investigate it. And the trauma, when an officer, when a team, as detectives go in to investigate something, they go in. It's a homicide until we prove different, and it's just the way we work it. We follow the facts, but we have to stay focused. And at that time, she was, this other officer was living with a very good friend of mine. He's the one that called it. He reported it. Found her down in the garage, and so to get that call from your superiors to say your team's going to be out there, you're the ones that are going to be out there, confiscating all the weapons, going through all the computers to look through and do all these search warrants and all these things, but the most intimate details of people that we worked with, and that, I will say, was probably one of the toughest things and probably one of the straws that led me to move on. After that, I actually took a small break and went into private security. I ran a security company here in Dallas and started, I was an operations manager. We were based out of Phoenix, Arizona, and went to work for a retired police chief and did that for a couple of years. Missed it and got back, but it's, probably for me, if you were to say, Greg, what's the most, what had the most impact to you is, in a negative manner. And I've been on suicides. I've been on murder-suicides where parents have murdered their children. I mean, it's some of the most horrific, horrible things. But for me to have one of my officers that directly worked for me that was struggling with other medical issues, and so there were some other variables at play here, and those restraints were eventually going to end her career, and that's all she thought she could do is be a police officer. And when she couldn't do that, that's the choice she made, and so that's taken me a long time to not only process, and you never know why, but I felt a lot of internal guilt over that. She was working for me in vice narcotics. I was supervising crimes against persons as well. We were a little short-handed at the time, and she couldn't handle the stressors, and she asked me to transfer her back to patrol. And I told her, no, you're where you need to be, not only as a friend, but just as a subordinate too. So I was a first-line supervisor, and it was within weeks of her going back to patrol. She'd come in and had a medical episode where car wasn't parked correctly in the parking space. She'd been at the station for 2 hours on a call that should have taken 15 minutes, just kind of zoned out, and that was, they sent her home, and that was the night. And should have asked more? Should I have, what, the who's, what's, when's, where's, why's, all of that starts running through like it does everybody. Yeah. But, being her supervisor, that ultimately, I mean, the chief approved the transfer. I basically denied it. I was overridden, so it wasn't all on my shoulders, but I felt like it was. I felt like I should have dug more. I should have dug deeper. And she had lupus, and I knew that. And so, we worked around it with different issues because of the side effects that you were having with that. But it's, that was tough, and it took me many years to get over that, to process, to forgive those above me that made me and my crew to go do that. And I received apologies. I accepted those apologies. But that was probably one of the most difficult things that I went through in my entire 30-year career.
You said something really interesting about how officers aren't going to seek out treatment from someone who's not been an officer. Mm-hmm. And what we know is a lot of these things, we know PTSD gets better, depression gets better, anxiety gets better when you seek help. How do departments put in some protocols or something for them to get some mental health that's maybe that they have that's built into the program there?
Well, I think what I talked about earlier is key to that, those critical incident stress management programs. Not only that, we see a lot more nowadays at a lot of the progressive agencies having actually mentors where they will take a young officer that has no experience and pair them up. They're not trained by this officer. It's just that one person you can go to off the record, so to speak, to, hey, I've got an issue with my field training officer, I've got problems at home, I've got this, I've got that. That's the other component too. I mean, as a supervisor, day in and day out, I can't tell you how many people I sent home on what we did call mental health days. I mean, internally is what we called it. Sometimes we would say, I need a mental health day tomorrow, and it was a sick day. I mean, it was authorized time, but we had a label for it, and it wasn't negative, to do that, but I would have officers come in that would be stressed out financially or had a fight with their wife. Bro, I need your head screwed on straight tonight. You're working deep nights. We're working down in this area down there. No, I'm not going to go knock on your wife's door at 3 a.m. because you had your head up your rear and you lost your life. And so there, there's added stress to the supervisory team. On top of that is you're not only you're responsible for you're responsible for everyone under your span of control, and it's 24/7 stress for at all levels. But going back to what we discussed is those critical incident stress management teams put together, having those mentors, someone that keeping those doors open. And I think now seeing the transition, being a Gen Xer. The millennials, I mean, we're all different from the other generations, and we have to understand that. But I have seen for all the things I dislike about the millennial generation, they are, I think, more open to conversation. They're they're more family oriented. It's different. They come in and, well, I've got 2 children. I need to go to days. Yeah. I worked 7 years before I went to days, and then I had Tuesday, Wednesday off, and it was for a very short time because I promoted, then I went back to deep nights with Tuesday, Wednesday off, so but it's amazing but it's also good to see.
Right.
We may not be able to accommodate that because of their short tenure, but that's on their mind.
Right.
And I'm seeing this shift a lot, personally over the years of where, for me, it was a career. I gave 110% every day. I can't tell you the birthdays, the Christmases, the Thanksgivings. I mean, oh my gosh, the homicides on Thanksgiving are horrendous. I mean, almost if I was on call on Thanksgiving, I knew I'd work a murder. I mean, it was just like unbelievable. It's all family type stuff. So that getting to a point where you see these officers that understand the challenges of shifts, but they put family first. I do like to see that. So that's one thing about the millennials that I really
I think that's a great point. And I do think, and not only are they putting family first, but they do a lot of self-care. They really, and they talk more about mental health.
They do.
And they take all of that really seriously, like being that whole person.
Yeah, and we're starting to see too, which I'm thankful for. I know you are too, Carla, and I'm sure you are too, Greg, is the fact that back in the day when you were being an officer, a lot of these calls that you would get were actually people that were suffering from mental health issues, and officers weren't trained to know how to exactly respond to that, or they didn't have a response team that had, counseling or psychiatry as one of their specialties to where they could actually keep this from becoming, an injury or death. And so have you seen a lot of shift in that since being an officer in your day and what we're seeing with the new departments and the departments now?
I think there's more focus on mental health now than there ever has been. Do I think it's fixed or anywhere near it needs to be?
Right.
Absolutely not. And I say that looking at the system and hopping around to 3 different agencies during my 30 years before I actually created my 4th agency. Moving from Dallas County, Richardson was in Dallas and Collin County, and we had a pretty good supportive system in place because there's county hospitals that serve the mentally ill. Denton County does not have a county hospital per se to deal with that. So when I'm transitioning over to Denton County, I mean, what do you mean it takes me 8 or 9 hours to deal with a mental health call, and we've got to call a mental health deputy from the sheriff's department, then we've got to call MHMR, or we got to go through UBH or some state-run school off of Mayhill, and all the red tape that you go through for that. It's easy to understand when they say, oh, okay, well, you know what? Yeah, he committed a Class C offense. Take his butt to jail. Wipe your hands and you're done. Okay. And I think too often that is still happening because there's not enough resources and programs and money coming from the state to get this done. Now, I will say, in Denton County's defense, that the commissioners and the elected officials have tried really hard. There's a good revenue stream coming in, and over the last 10 years, I've seen a dramatic change in Denton County from what there was when I first went there to what's available now, and there's still not a county hospital there. And think of all the counties, these small rural areas where there's not one. What happens? Yeah. And I'll tell you, if there's not a county hospital, then you've got to go to Wichita Falls. Ugh. What if you're 5 hours away from Wichita Falls?
Yeah.
What if they're on divert? What if they don't have space? Yeah. There's just not enough places and programs to effectively deal with it. Or let's say they're combative, they're intoxicated to their own drugs. Many facilities won't take them, and understandably.
Right.
Denton County's really reached out, and they've got off-duty officers at work now. Their intake process is, even if they're combative, they've got security there. They want them there. We've got to get them help because we got to keep from diverting them over to the jails, because that's not the answer.
Right.
Or we're taking them to emergency rooms, and then we're overcrowding emergency rooms.
Right.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
Yeah. It's just not a place. There's not.
And I'll share this, and I talked about this last night when I came back after a 3-year retirement, so to speak, in Mexico. I did some consulting work for a hospital here in the area, and that's exactly the case. So they would have there's a process called APAL. It's apprehension of a person without a warrant. It allows a police officer to basically take someone into custody if they think that they're an immediate danger to themselves or others, and that is what we need. And when I was talking about Denton County, an officer could do that, but there's nobody to turn them over to.
Exactly.
So now there is. At that time there wasn't. But
and so where do they turn them over to now?
So, for example, in Denton, there's MHMR has gotten additional funding, and they actually come into that facility now, and they will process those without having, because before that, what was having to happen is you would send a deputy from the county to wherever, even if you're a city. Let's say you worked in the town of Little Elm and you had a mental health issue. Denton County deputy would have to come out. They may or may not be on duty. If they are, it may be a couple hours till they get there. Then the MHMR's got to come out and do their quote-unquote evaluation. And you're taking your precious resource. There's not enough police officers to patrol the streets already. Now you've got at least 2 officers tied up, if not a supervisor, on trying to deal with it. What if you're a 2-man department? What if you're a 3-man department? That's your entire force for the entire shift or beyond over this. And so the impact to your resources is just unbelievable.
Not to mention the money that the taxpayers are paying for you guys to have to go. If you sit down and think about the money lost, if you figure that versus just go ahead and building a facility, problem's fixed. And I really wish that people would think about it from that direction. All the resources we're putting into the time that it takes for you guys to locate the resources, the money that's lost from taxpayers there, if they could just figure that out right there, buildings would be built.
Redirect it to.
It would all be done. I mean, that would be a solution, right?
Absolutely.
And it would be great even to have mental health professionals on the police force,
Yes.
or officers trained or educated in mental
That's
health.
the next step that I was going to. The deputies I spoke to you about received special training, and that's why they're called mental health deputies. And now pretty much every police department is now doing that, especially in Denton County, where you don't have a county hospital to go fill out that APAL form, drop them off at Parkland Hospital, have them evaluated, and see what needs to happen. So, in Richardson we use them, and we also use, I think, Medical City. We could take them over there as well. Those were the
They've got a good
locations.
facility there too. Yeah.
But again, that's, sometimes that's temporary as well.
Right.
They'll go in there, and the system's only as good as the people are honest.
Yes.
And sometimes, they'll tell them, yeah, give me my meds, I'll be out. They pop one, they go back, throw them in the dumpster, and
they absolutely know how to work the system for sure.
100%.
Which is frustrating for you guys because they're the repeaters that
Repeat
are
offenders, we
taking
see
your
them over
time,
and over.
and it's just frustrating. But at the same time, there's a level of empathy, I guess, you have to put out there.
There is empathy along with frustration. You
Right.
talk to some of the officers that worked years and years and years ago. I'm not talking about any recent times to where they were like, hey, where do you want to go? Oh, okay. Buying bus tickets, put them on a bus.
Yeah.
Put them on a bus.
Yeah.
To wherever, who in their right mind would do that?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just that
The
was
old mentality that we had.
Yes,
And the
absolutely.
lack of
Thankful-
resources.
And the lack of resources.
Yeah. Yeah. Times
all
have
you're doing
changed.
is displacing the problem.
Yeah, yeah.
We do that with crime. The police, when we worked Spring Valley and Coit, Dallas was on one side and Richardson was on the other. When we had a strong force of going on, crime would get better in Richardson and would push it all back into Dallas. You're never going to eradicate it.
Yeah.
You're just
You're just
displacing
shifting it.
And that's the same thing that was happening with these poor individuals that truly needed help, and they were just being displaced. Let's push them off to somebody else's problem.
And I think we've been doing that for years. We're pushing and pushing and pushing, and we're running out of places to push.
Yeah.
And I think it's creating more of this mental health crisis.
Well, I guess, I don't know if irony is the right word here, but for years as a law enforcement officer and throughout my career, I was a big supporter of Texas Special Olympics. And so, a wonderful nonprofit program that serves individuals with intellectual disabilities, and we don't even use the word mental retardation anymore. It's those with intellectual disabilities, and I always had a special place in my heart for those individuals, and I always learned more from them being around them than they ever got out of me. They're enamored and just in love with police and the badges, and they just
they're
amazing.
just so real. They're so honest.
Real. Yes, so no filters, no filters. But the best of times, and you see these programs that are out there so I know it can be done.
Right.
We're doing this for people that were born with intellectual disabilities,
Right.
and have the people that have developed over time mental health. Why can't we have the same thing? Why can't we have the same thing? And I think hopefully America's on that path to recognizing. The more it's talked about, the more it's discussed, the more opportunities that, just like this, to join this podcast, to, put out a message and let people know it's, number one, yes, it's okay to talk about it. Two, yes, you need to talk about it. And three, what can we do instead of just talking about it to affect change? And
Right.
what's it going to take to get to that next level, whether it's writing your congressman or your state representatives on getting additional funding, resources, facilities, whatever it takes. But it's going to take a multidisciplinary approach to put a committee and a group together like that to really see this to the finish line.
And you're looking at really high stress jobs. Like we're talking about officers and very high stress, burnout. I mean, they're underappreciated, underpaid. It is the same for mental health professionals.
Yes.
All of those things are following them just as much. And so I think that's why we're not getting people to consistently stay in these careers, because they can't.
Yeah.
There's such a high turnover.
We're so focused on taking care of everybody else, but we don't take care of the people that are actually the ones that take care of us, protect us mentally and physically.
Yeah.
And it's become, I think, like you said, the light's coming out and it's shining on these issues, but there's so much more to do with this, so much more.
Well, and you talk about self-care and the new millennials, and one thing that I think was probably the most beneficial to me in that self-care type of thing is I had the wonderful opportunity in 2010 to attend the FBI National Academy in Quantico.
Wow.
And only 1% of law enforcement officials get a chance to go to that. So it's a very, very prestigious thing. I don't even wear a college ring. I wear my FBI ring, as I'm so proud of it. And it was 3 months that I was up there. But the whole teaching and the whole reason for that program was, number one, many years ago, was to professionalize policing and stop the brutality and the things that were going on and the corruption. And so that was the main intent. But now the focus has shifted on, okay, if I'm going to be a leader of an agency, then by God, I better understand what it's going to take to lead my team. And I've got to be mentally fit. I've got to be physically fit. I've got to project an image. And and we all see. I mean, I don't want to pick on obesity, but there's a certain connotation. There's a certain amount of respect or lack of command presence for those type of things, and how do we fix that? Self-care, because just like you talked about, the police officers aren't getting support from the community like they used to, and there's a lot that do. There's a lot of great communities out there,
right.
But the healthcare workers, the nurses, the teachers, look at all of these jobs and these public service jobs that are so crucial and so vital to ensuring well-being for all of us.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the ones that are the most high turnover,
Yeah.
because, again, they're lacking that support. And my point to all this is there's not an FBI academy for teachers. There's not an FBI academy for mental health professionals. And I'm thankful that I got to go through that. But, again, teaching that self-care, that, hey, if we're going to be in charge of taking care of others, number one, we've got to take care of ourselves first.
100%.
We have to. And that it carries over to family, to work, and to everything we do in our lives, and we've got to make that time. And we can. We just got to be diligent about it and plan ahead. But teaching that message to all those other workers, it's not just police that need to hear it. The firefighters, the teachers, the mental health workers, the nurses, all of those that are in this realm fighting this battle and trying to do the best they can with what little resources.
All
they
your
have.
first responders, which is everybody you just said, your
Yes.
teachers, your
All of them.
therapists, your police officers, and I wish everybody knew that this is a passion. You guys went into this not because of the money, because the money's not there necessarily.
Right.
You did it because you wanted to serve people, and I really wish we would get back to that mentality instead of vilifying our teachers, our therapists, our police officers. If we got back into the mentality of going, look, this is they did this for a passion, and unfortunately, we're seeing now that. Just like you, the resources are so limited, it's burning everybody out.
Yes.
You're on burnout. So what do you think a solution is other than, we're talking about, providing more resources. What are some other solutions you think that we should be coming up with?
I think, generally speaking, with mental health overall is to continue down that path to ensure that there's enough state and federal funding,
Right.
number one, to take care of this crisis. And it's, I don't care if it's, I'm not even tying it in just to the active mass shooter type incidents that we've had, but that ties back into mental health. So many times, and it's just there's in society nowadays we're so desensitized, and whether you want to blame it on video games or dual income households where the kids are doing nothing but occupying themselves with video games and on their phones and devices, but there's got to be more focus on that, and I think ultimately is the same reason that we're building a police department where I'm at right now. We need a purpose-built facility to better serve our employees so they can better serve our residents and our businesses and our business owners. So the same concept applies for this here. Is we need those facilities, and they need and then there's got to be funding out there somewhere. You look at all these other police departments across the state where they're taking away training and they're mandating all this other type of money's available. We just got to find a way where to carve it out of from somewhere else that's not being used to this best advantage and focus it on mental health.
And that's where our political leaders need to really focus on the budgets and where the money's going, and are we really using it to the best advantage of the communities? And so, we need to find ways to re-budget that money and make sure we're getting facilities that are going to actually help people get well.
Tell us about this facility you're talking about.
So Elm Ridge is the agency where I created the police department. They rebranded. It was the Denton County Freshwater Supply District number 10, which was a water control and improvement district. So most water districts are built out in rural areas, master plan type communities, and they're funded by the developers, who in turn get reimbursed through the sale of bonds to pay for things. You're basically trying to help produce growth in the county when the county has no money to do that. There's no economic development corporation, so to speak, for counties, and there's no programs for that. So these water districts come in. Typically, they're annexed. The one that I work for will probably never be annexed because they have 3 different non-contiguous areas that fall within 3 different jurisdictions. So they were not happy with the lack of service from the county, from the sheriff's department, and it was nothing against the sheriff or his men or women. It was the fact that they're serving Denton County.
They're tapped out.
Yeah, they're tapped out. They're there helping chase loose cows and take reports from the farmers, but they're not they're not built, and the whole sheriff's department is not. The focus is not on master plan communities where
Right.
you're throwing 10 and 12,000 people all over Denton County.
Right.
It just simply can't be done. And so the residents basically said, "Hey, we're not okay with an hour response time on an alarm call to our house. We're not okay with never seeing a police car. We're not okay with." So it just, the leaders finally said, "Hey, Greg, can we, by law, start a police department?" I said, "Absolutely. There's 5 of them in the state of Texas right now already, and yes, I can do that for you."
Wow.
And so that,
I love that.
I do too.
It's kind of a
I wasn't even
pop-up
aware.
police officer
yeah,
station.
absolutely. And there's, I tell you, the really cool thing about that is I don't know anyone in the police chief circle in the entire state of Texas that can say they started a police department.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a couple of independent school district departments that are popping
Right.
up, so
Yeah.
they've done that. But it was a heck of a feat. I retired after 25 years of service, leaving the city of Corinth, and started the very next day at the water district, and that was May of 2018. And I went live with a 9-man operation, man and woman operation, nine personnel on January 20th of
Wow.
2019. So in 7 months, I'm talking about no buildings, no uniforms, no badges, no guns, no handcuffs, no boots, no general orders, I mean, from the ground up to that. And it was, I had a wonderful team that
Right.
made that come true, that shared my passion and the elected director's passion to do that. And so coming full circle, that's what brought me back to Texas and introduced me to my fiance. So
And
I'm
she
happy
is
to be
beautiful,
back.
by the way. She's gorgeous.
So,
You're marrying
Good
up,
luck.
Greg.
I am, and I know it. But I got a call. I was living on the island of Cozumel, and I got a call from my general manager at the district, and he said, "Hey, I've got a proposition for you. You want to come back to Texas?" Absolutely not.
I'm not Cozumel to Texas. Why would I?
But here's another mental health tidbit too. I actually never. If you asked me 4 or 5 years ago if I would have ever put all these words together in this order in a sentence that
Right.
says there's only so many margaritas and beaches until it becomes old and mundane. I mean, literally, I was kind of going into a state of depression myself. I had found that you need a purpose in life, and I've retired
I agree.
early at 49, and that was too early. I still had things I wanted to do, and so I thought about it. After about 4 or 5 weeks, the boss called again and said, "Okay, I need an answer." And I said, "Yeah, when do you need me?" And he said, "Well, when can you get here?" I said, "I'll be there in a couple of weeks." And I had downsized everything. I mean, literally everything I owned fit in 3 suitcases. So
Oh, wow.
Packed up my little 4-pound Chihuahua and my luggage.
The Chihuahua.
Don Pablo.
Is that his name?
It is.
That's awesome.
He's from Playa del
that.
Carmen. He's a true Mexican Chihuahua. But he's having a blast in this 105-degree heat.
bet
right
he
now.
is. God love
loves
it.
He loves it.
Oh, that's great. I love that.
No
so
ocean,
much.
though. No ocean.
He misses
Dang
the,
it.
He misses the playa. He misses the playa.
That is so amazing. I do want to ask, how do officers handle the changing societal view and their role in the community? I mean, it's changing so much.
It is, and the advice that I gave the officers when I was chief and on down the line is the less outside noise in media that you can subject yourself to, the better.
Yeah.
Because I tell you, it's after when I was transitioning from full time to part time, I was actually flying back and forth from Mexico as the new chief took over, and I was still kind of consulting and doing some work for the districts, and I would be subjected to the media. That's all I got in Mexico. What do you see and hear is from Facebook, from this, that, and the other, because I wasn't living it. So I fell into that trap myself. But yet I'd come back and I would be in uniform. I'd go to lunch somewhere, and it's like every time I went, someone picked up the tab. It's the waiter or waitress would come around. No, it's already been paid for by another table. And so that just goes to show you that there really are good people out there.
There
are.
And,
This
is
is
just like
America,
the country
and
song,
there are a
most
lot of
people are
good
good.
people.
Yes, most people are good, and they truly are. And when going back to Dr. Gil Martin's book on emotional survival for police officers, and he talks about that is, don't surround yourself with all police officers. You're trying to fight off that cynicism to where, everybody's guilty until they're proven innocent. And I don't mean that in a judicial sense, meaning that, you're always got this jaded view about everything because it works on the streets, and that's a proper application.
Right.
But you don't want to take that home to your wife and use that same type of thing, or your children, or, no, you prove to me that you're innocent. You're guilty until you prove otherwise. You find that you
it's
use
hard not to get out of that mentality,
tactics,
though.
those mentalities,
Yeah.
yes, and it's a constant battle. So again, it's with my youngest daughter is a nurse, and she's gone through a couple of traumatic things here lately. She works in downtown Fort Worth, and there was a recent shooting over in Como where 7 or 8 victims were. They received a couple of the victims there, and she said, "Dad, the worst thing I ever did was on my break start getting on the news, seeing what happened." And it wasn't a gang versus gang thing. These were innocent victims, and she had a hard time processing that. And I'm like, "Sweet girl, you're never going to know why.
Yeah.
Why is going to be unanswered so many times." And I said, "I promise you, from running a crimes against persons unit, from everything from gang issues to gang rapes to homicides. Richardson was a small town, but anything that was a crime against a person came to my unit, and I managed that for a couple of years. And you see a lot of things, a lot of horrible things, but again, you've got to distance yourself. You've got to disconnect, and you've got to find a way to do it that's healthy, that's not through alcohol, that's not through staying in the gym, doing what you can do to do that, but tuning out, and not surrounding yourself with peers of the same thing. And I think that would go to the firemen and the mental health workers things too. It's good to get that other outsider perspective, because when you do that, you realize how much people do care and how many good people are there.
Yeah.
Getting to know your neighbors. Gosh sakes, we just moved into a wonderful neighborhood in Salina, and we've met both of our neighbors now. Some new ones just moved in from California, but it's just, again, it's different people, different perspectives, different jobs, and that's, over the years, I've always said, you got to strive to be a better person every day, and never stop learning, and to focus on that. But the more you can learn about others, the more you learn, and I think that. And with that comes adaptability, and you're more open to change and different ways of doing things. Because if you stay with that same nucleus of people, it's groupthink, and you're going to be stuck down there, and you're going to keep thinking the same thing.
Yeah, and I think just in general, getting people to see police officers are choosing to do this. They're choosing to be in this job every day, and they're choosing it because they love people. They love all people. And, right now we have this perspective that there's some kind of bad rap or something about wearing a uniform, and people are seeing them in a different way. And that just has to be so disheartening for this community of officers to know that they're doing this, they're putting their lives on the line, their families are sacrificing, they're sacrificing, and people see them in such a bad way.
It's tough. And media again.
Yeah.
I hate to point my finger at media, because as a former public information officer, when we had a bad, something go on, or if we had a kidnapping, and they were our friends, and I reached out. Yes, yeah. Absolutely. But by the same token, they've also got a job to do, and then ratings and everything else. Right. And I go back to the Vietnam War. You look at what little was known during the Vietnam War, because there was no media to capture live things. I mean, we're watching war live now.
Yeah.
Whether you're in Ukraine or wherever you're at, the things that my fiance sees from Peru, she's from Lima, all the government issues and torment stuff. I mean, we are just inundated and bombarded with all this media. And so, yeah, are there 1% of cops that are bad? Absolutely. And they need to lose their job. They need to be
There's bad apples everywhere.
There's bad apples everywhere.
Right.
But
Right.
it shouldn't affect the whole profession.
But unfortunately,
of
we're living in a world that wants to vilify.
Yeah.
One bad apple makes them all bad.
Yeah.
And I will say, though, to that it comes in with effective leadership. So people like you, officers get in situations, unfortunately, because the media has vilified them, not even knowing the circumstances. They need to know that their supervisors and that they've got their back.
Yeah.
And are you seeing a shift in that? Because it feels like sometimes when I watch the news, and it could be, you're seeing that from the outside, not the inside. Do you feel like these officers truly feel like they're lieutenants, they have their backs, and they're not being influenced by the higher ups of the city governments and all
Politics
that good stuff?
And everything like that. By and large, yes.
Okay.
I'll say that. And again, it goes back to the individual that's in that leadership
Right.
role, of course. It just so, there's so many variables at play with that. But I'll say this, that, there's the line level supervisors that are out there. There's no doubt. The higher you go up the chain, and yes, the priorities shift and change, and you're looking at things through a different lens, and it is different. But like I told my officers day in and day out as a chief, I said, I promise you, I said, you're not going to have an answer. The general orders is not going to answer every question you have out there. But I said, I pride myself on two things. Number one, I call it the pillow test. If I can lay my head down on the pillow at night and I can peacefully sleep, then I know I've done something that's either right for the individual or it might be right for the organization or whatever the case may be. It may not be a popular decision, but,
right.
you know, and it's just that self-test, you know, that I do. But, you know, I told all of my officers, I don't care if you break the law. I don't care if you break the rules. If I can stand up before Channel 5 News today and defend what you did, then by God, do it.
Wow.
I mean, and it's that simple. It's rules are meant to be broken. Sometimes you have to. I'll give a prime example. We had a Garland police officer that was running down the tollway, chasing a drunk lady going the wrong way on the toll road on George Bush. And this is where when you're a chief, you can't completely dial out. You got to know what's going on around you, and you got to see what these officers are doing, because I guarantee you, every time I learn something like this, that would be my briefing topic, and I would go in there and I would brief those officers with that. First thing they said was this officer violated policy. He turned around and he went the wrong way on that road, but he went the wrong way, head-on collision. That car stopped it. He was injured, seriously injured. Got the suspect, and I said, "That's good police work." What? Our general order says we want. Yeah, our general order says that. But I said, in this situation, that officer saw 2 or 3 cars coming and knew that there was going to be a head-on collision. He took it over there, and he
took the hit.
He took the hit.
Yeah.
He took the hit. Can I defend that all day long? Absolutely, I can.
Yeah.
Is it against the general order? Yes. You know, may we get sued? Maybe so. But
the lives are saved.
I can't. I can't go 200 yards down the street down there and then have to go knocking on everybody's doors. I'm sorry that your family of 4 got killed.
Yes.
You know, on their way to school today because they had a drunk driver going the wrong way. You know, it's things like that. So it's just, you know,
rules need to be changed, you know, periodically, evaluated, looked at. Or
if they
is this
can be
in the best
justified
interest?
and defended, absolutely. And that's the thing. And so, you know, that's the thing that these officers need to know. They need to know that, and it's got to be clearly communicated, because if not, they're going to make decisions. What I'm seeing is actually the opposite of that, or the extremes. I'm seeing 2 different extremes. I'm seeing millennials who have no social skills whatsoever that go from 0 to deadly force unnecessarily, or officers that are scared to death to make a decision, and they're getting shot and they're getting killed.
And we're seeing a lot of that
because
right now.
What's my boss going to think? What's the jury going to think? What's my neighbors going to think? What's the media going to think?
They're worried.
This is going through their mind when they need to be pulling the trigger.
Yeah.
You know, and so this pressure has created 2 sets of problems now. Now that pendulum is swinging left to right.
But it has to stop. Yes. It has to stop. We have to get back in a place where we trust our officers. We're trusting our leaders. They're there for the community. And you're right. The officers are scared to death.
We have to back our guys. Yeah. And, you know, between our military, our first responders, our police officers, they need the support of the community, because, you know, it's like you said, it's just one bad apple usually.
Exactly.
But leaders like you, I mean, if every department could have the mentality you have, of knowing, hey, you did the right thing. It doesn't matter if you met protocol or you violated protocol. You did the right thing. You saved 3 additional lives and lawsuits. Yep. You saved money and you took a hit for yourself. And people need to come back to the respecting that these first responders, they put their life on the line every day. And not to mention, it's not just doing that at a day-to-day, but then they have to go home and they have to, you know, process everything. Mm-hmm. And you know, it's not, their job doesn't stop because problems still exist at home. And I wish people understood the sacrifices that our law enforcement make.
Yeah, and likewise, I think it's important for officers to be trained to understand their community, to understand, to be empathetic to the differences in their community so that they can connect with them. And I think that's really important.
No, it is. And that goes back to that community policing that we talked about.
Right.
Because, again, it's I don't care if you're the best statistician or the best crime analyst in the world. At the end of the day, none of that matters. You know, it might be somebody parking the wrong way, facing the wrong direction next door to this lady's house. That's her biggest problem.
Yeah.
it's not this, that, or the other, and you're not going to know until you talk to that lady. So those are those programs of the bicycle programs, the foot patrols, they're going back to the old school way of doing things. Sometimes, old school is the best way.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we shouldn't make judgments. We haven't walked in people's shoes. So
Right.
that's where we need to be empathetic. Ask questions, be there, connect, because we don't know why people make certain decisions or why they got scared and pulled a knife on this person or whatever that is. We haven't walked in their shoes, and that's where we have to be empathetic.
Yep. And that goes back to adequate resources, whether it's police manpower. I mean, you look at the larger cities like Dallas you come on the streets, you're holding 150, 200 calls,
Yeah.
and some of those calls take 3 or 4 days to answer.
Yeah.
And
They do.
they take 3 or 4 days to answer. And even in Richardson, I remember working, deep nights or evenings. I worked evenings from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. We'd come on at 2 o'clock, calls be holding, especially the deep nights. I mean, when we came on at 6 p.m., it was, that we had a split shift, and it was running calls all the way up and through until it's like 2 o'clock, and it slows down. And then your car burglars and your other burglars come out, and you got to be out in your neighborhoods. But it was just call to call to call, and you can only be so effective, So
Right.
there are agencies, and I know at my agency, the agencies that I work with for some other water districts that I manage, we track those officer calls, and we're looking at what the ratio is and what the percentage is on their self-initiated activity. And the good thing is most of these suburban agencies, 35 to 45% of the time, the officers patrolling their neighborhoods are generating activity self-initiated, not dispatch calls. So that means over almost half the time of their shift, they get to drive around and look for stuff, talk to people, and do that. And so keeping those
That's
ratios
great.
is
Yeah.
important, and having leaders that understand that balance, that have to bring those hard numbers to the council and says, look, I need $500,000 for 5 more officers this year because our ratios are askew. We've got to man, or the number of officers to civilian population has just become imbalanced too much. But staying on top of that and having support from the taxpayers with taxes. But that's unfortunately the general fund is what funds all your public safety, your police and fire. And in most cities and suburbs, 50% of the general fund is your public safety, just police and fire. That eats up half of it.
Wow.
Well, I think this has been such a great conversation
Yes.
about police officers and mental health and the struggles, not only the community and how they have mental health issues and how we're responding to those, but also the mental health issues with police officers. It's just so impactful, and the things that they see and do every day, and having to try to keep good mental health, because it does change their productivity. It does change safety protocols. And if they're not in a good place, those things aren't followed, it's dangerous for them, it's dangerous for the community. And so this is such a great talk, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much, Greg,
No,
for
thank
being
you
a
very
guest on
much.
our show. I know that your testimony and your story is going to change lives, so we're thankful for that.
Well, I hope so. And, just to end on this, for those of you that are out there, I would just urge the public to, engage yourself. Get involved with something, whether it's Special Olympics Texas, whether it's the Prelude Clubhouse in Plano.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that I donate to. They're working with Love and War on a big country concert coming up. There's a lot of things planned. There's a lot of other organizations out there that help sustain these individuals when they're not in a time of need, to help keep them where they need to be and take them from
Exactly.
place to place. And so there's a lot of things out there, and I think the more we can get the public to find a way to give back, we can't expect everything to come from our legislators and our government, but if they've got money to give, look at those type of associations and do
Be
that.
part of your community.
Yes.
Exactly. Dial in. Well, thank you, ladies. I
Thank
enjoyed it
you.
very
Thank
much.
you so much. If you or anyone you know is struggling with mental health issues, please reach out to talk to someone you trust. Get connected to a mental health professional who can help you find ways to cope and ultimately feel better. If you are having suicidal or self-harm thoughts or thoughts of hurting another person, please go to the nearest ER, call 911, or contact the National Suicide Hotline at 988. Thank you for tuning in to Mental Perk. We hope our talk today highlighted real people working through real issues based on mental health. Our goal at Mental Perk is to make sure every one of you knows
You're worthy.
We're in this together.